They came without warning. A fleet of towering warships, black as the void, pierced through Earth's orbital defenses like they were made of paper. The Xelari, a species of ruthless conquerors, had found humanity at last. Their emissary, a being encased in a living armor of segmented chitin, appeared on every screen across the planet. It spoke in a voice that was both alien and eerily human. Surrender or be eradicated. Humanity barely had time to react before the first wave of destruction began. Cities were incinerated in the blink of an eye. The Xelari's biomechanical warriors marched through streets littered with bodies. Resistance was futile. Earth's military forces fought valiantly but crumbled against the invaders' superior technology. They called us weak. The Xelari did not see warriors in the humans they slaughtered. They saw cattle docile and soft creatures incapable of true defiance. Their empire had conquered hundreds of worlds and crushed countless civilizations. To them humanity was just another insignificant species to be assimilated or erased. But they were wrong. The survivors did not kneel. They ran, they hid, but they did not break. From the ruins of fallen cities resistance cells formed. The Xelari hunted them down, but with every execution, with every massacre, their hatred grew. Humanity's spirit was a flame that would not be snuffed out. Elias Voss was among the first to strike back. A former engineer before the invasion, Elias had no military training, no combat experience. What he had was a mind sharpened by desperation. He scavenged what little technology the Xelari had left behind, reverse-engineered it, adapted it. He turned old human drones into makeshift war machines, crafted EMP devices capable of shorting out enemy patrols. He taught others how to fight, how to think like engineers rather than soldiers. They called us weak. They thought our lack of natural weapons made us vulnerable. But humanity's strength was never in its biology. It was in its mind and its ability to adapt. The Xelari controlled the skies, but the resistance controlled the shadows. They built networks of tunnels beneath the rubble of once great cities. They learned how to jam Xelari communications, how to exploit the weaknesses in their armor. A single guerrilla raid turned into dozens, then hundreds. For every human the Xelari killed, 10 more took up arms. And then something changed. The Xelari began to fear. Their patrols moved in larger groups, hesitant and cautious. They fortified their bases, reinforcing them with layers of shielding and turrets. Their warriors no longer marched with arrogance but with uncertainty. Elias had struck something deeper than just their forces. He had wounded their pride. The Xelari's greatest strength was their belief in their own superiority. Every species they had conquered had submitted without question. But humanity did not bend, did not break. The Xelari began to whisper among themselves, questioning whether this world was worth the effort. But the humans knew the war was far from over. The resistance needed something more. A way to turn the tide. Elias and his team of scavengers found it in the wreckage of a Xelari warship that had been shot down by one of Earth's last defense stations. Its core was intact, a swirling sphere of alien energy unlike anything humanity had ever seen. It pulsed with power and with understanding. Elias saw what had to be done. Humanity could not win by fighting conventionally. It had to evolve, adapt faster than the enemy could comprehend. The Xelari saw them as weak, but that was their greatest mistake. Because when humanity was pushed to the edge, when survival itself was at stake, it did what no other species had done before. It changed. And so the first steps were taken, the first experiments, the first breakthroughs. Elias knew they were playing with forces beyond their comprehension. But there was no other choice. The Xelari thought they had crushed humanity. But they had only just awakened it. The Xelari were not prepared for what came next. In the ruined remains of Earth's once great cities, something was changing. Humanity had always adapted to survive, but now it was evolving faster than any species the Xelari had ever encountered. Elias Voss and his team of scavengers had unlocked something in the wreckage of the downed Xelari warship, a core of alien energy unlike anything they had ever seen. It didn't just power the ship. It was alive in a way they barely understood. The moment they brought it back to their hidden base, it began interacting with their technology, rewriting code, enhancing their systems. Elias realized they had stumbled upon the key to something dangerous, something powerful. And something the Xelari feared. Deep in the tunnels beneath what was once New Chicago, Elias and his team worked day and night, pushing their minds and bodies beyond exhaustion. They reverse-engineered the energy core, integrating its properties into human-made machines, creating weapons and armor that no longer followed the limits of Earth's science. The first prototype, a combat exosuit enhanced by the Xelari's own technology, was a crude but terrifying success. When tested against a captured Xelari drone, it moved faster than the eye could track, shattered the drone's armor with a single blow, and adapted its shielding against incoming plasma fire. But the energy core did more than just enhance technology. It did something to those who spent too much time near it. Elias felt it first. His reflexes sharpened, his thoughts accelerated. He could predict enemy movements before they happened, as if his mind were processing possibilities at an inhuman speed. Others in his team reported similar effects: heightened awareness, increased strength, instincts that bordered on precognition. At first, they were cautious. Then they realized the truth. The Xelari's technology had been built for war, but their species had never considered the possibility that another race could use it against them. Their arrogance had blinded them. They had called humans weak, had dismissed them as nothing more than another species to conquer. And that had been their greatest mistake. The first true battle came when the Xelari sent an elite squad to hunt down the resistance. Heavily armored warriors, enhanced with biomechanical augmentations, stormed the underground tunnels. They had studied human tactics, prepared for their usual hit-and-run strikes. They were not prepared for what met them in the darkness. Elias led the charge, his exosuit moving with impossible speed. Plasma fire erupted in the tunnels, but the human warriors weaved through it like phantoms. The first Xelari fell before it even registered the threat, its armor caved in by a single strike. The others reacted too slowly. One by one, they were torn apart. By the time the last Xelari warrior collapsed, gasping in disbelief, Elias stood over him, his armor flickering with energy. He could see the terror in the alien's many eyes. "You called us weak." The words hung in the air, unspoken but understood. The Xelari gasped something in their own language, something Elias didn't understand but recognized all the same. Fear. The battle was over in minutes. The resistance had just defeated the Xelari's most elite soldiers. And they were only getting started. The Xelari fleet did not take the loss lightly. When their elite warriors failed to return, they responded with overwhelming force. Orbital bombardments turned entire sectors into molten wastelands, reducing underground hideouts to dust. They deployed new war machines, drones with adaptive shielding, patrols with advanced scanning technology, biological horrors designed to hunt human survivors through scent and sound. But the resistance had already changed. Elias Voss and his team had pushed past the limits of what should have been possible. The alien energy core had become more than just a power source, it had rewritten the rules of human evolution. Those who had spent enough time near it were no longer just human. Their reflexes were faster than anything the Xelari had recorded. Their strength defied logic. Their minds processed patterns at speeds that outmatched the enemy's artificial intelligences. And they were learning. The next time a Xelari patrol entered the ruins of Old Berlin, it was a massacre, but not in the way they expected. The hunters became the hunted. Human warriors, clad in sleek exosuits pulsing with alien energy, moved like shadows. Xelari plasma fire struck empty air as their targets blurred between cover. When the humans struck, they did so with terrifying precision, shattering armor with single blows, dismantling war machines with improvised weapons. The Xelari screamed in frustration. This was not war as they understood it. This was something else. Something worse. Across the planet, more resistance cells began reporting similar breakthroughs. Scavenged Xelari technology was no longer just being repurposed, it was being improved. Drones reprogrammed by human engineers outperformed the enemy's own models. Neural interfaces allowed warriors to process battle data in real time, predicting enemy movements before they happened. The Xelari command grew concerned. Their forces had conquered hundreds of worlds, crushed species far more advanced than humanity. And yet, here was a species that should have been eradicated already, a species that had no business standing against them, fighting back harder with each passing day. And then came the Real warning sign. A Xelari warlord, high-ranking and ruthless, led an assault on a known resistance stronghold deep in the remains of Tokyo. It was supposed to be a decisive strike, a final blow to break the human spirit. But when the warlord's forces stormed the ruined city, they found it abandoned. No resistance. No civilians. Nothing. And then the ambush began. From the shadows, from the ruins, from above and below, the humans struck with terrifying precision. The warlord's troops fell in seconds. Energy weapons shorted out, their systems overloaded by electromagnetic pulses. Their reinforcements were cut off by drone swarms too fast to track. And when the warlord himself was dragged from the wreckage of his command unit, he saw something that filled him with dread. Elias Voss stood over him, his eyes glowing faintly with the energy of the stolen Xelari core. His voice was calm, too calm. "You thought we were weak." The warlord bared his fangs. Even captured, he refused to acknowledge defeat. But then Elias leaned closer, and the warlord saw it, the thing that should not have been possible. Elias was reading him. Not just his body language, not just his expressions. He understood him. Saw through him. The warlord felt fear for the first time in his life. Because he realized the truth. The Xelari had not just failed to conquer humanity. They had created something far, far worse. The warlord's capture sent shockwaves through the Xelari command. This was not how the invasion was supposed to go. Humanity should have been broken, scattered, begging for mercy. Instead, they were evolving. Adapting. Becoming something the Xelari could no longer predict. Interrogation attempts failed. The warlord refused to speak, convinced that rescue would come. But as the days passed, and no Xelari forces arrived, he began to realize the truth. The humans were not holding him for ransom. They were not seeking negotiations. They were studying him. Elias and his team didn't waste time with threats or torture. They didn't need to. They had already cracked the Xelari's language, their command structure, their technology. Now, they were dissecting something far more valuable, the Xelari mindset. And what they learned changed everything. The Xelari were not invincible. Their empire was vast, but it was built on fear, on the belief that no species could stand against them. Every war they had fought had been won through psychological dominance before a single shot was fired. Their enemies had surrendered because they believed resistance was futile. Humanity had shattered that illusion. The Xelari fleet, despite its overwhelming firepower, was hesitant. Their commanders were beginning to doubt. If humanity could adapt this quickly, if they could turn Xelari technology against its creators, what else were they capable of? Elias knew this was their chance. The resistance launched its most daring attack yet. Using stolen Xelari codes, they infiltrated a Xelari command station orbiting Jupiter, one of the key hubs coordinating the invasion. The Xelari expected a brute force assault, but what they got was something far worse. A virus. Not a digital virus, a human virus. A weaponized signal designed to spread through the Xelari's neural-linked communication network, broadcasting a single, undeniable truth to every Xelari in the system. They are losing. They are not invincible. They are afraid. And once fear takes hold, it spreads like wildfire. Across the fleet, Xelari soldiers hesitated in battle, their instincts faltering. Some ships withdrew entirely, their commanders unwilling to risk annihilation. The Empire's psychological grip had been broken, and for the first time in their history, the Xelari were forced to confront an enemy that did not fear them. The warlord, still in captivity, watched the chaos unfold. He saw the transmissions, heard the desperation in his people's voices. And he understood something his leaders did not. This was not humanity fighting for survival anymore. This was humanity on the offensive. And the Xelari had no idea how to stop them. The first Xelari defection came 3 days later. A cruiser, once part of the fleet blockading Earth, transmitted an urgent message to the resistance. Its commander, an elder strategist named Vorthak, had abandoned the Xelari war doctrine. Not out of mercy. Not out of regret. Out of fear. Vorthak had studied human warfare for decades before the invasion. He had believed them to be predictable, fragile, incapable of matching the sheer force of the Xelari Empire. Now, he saw the truth. They were unpredictable. Worse, they were learning faster than any species the Xelari had ever encountered. And Vorthak knew what happened to species the Xelari could not control. The Empire would burn the entire planet to ash rather than admit defeat. But it was too late for that. Elias Voss and his resistance forces had already begun their final push. With the Xelari fleet fracturing and fear spreading through their ranks, humanity struck where it hurt most. They weren't just destroying ships anymore. They were taking them. Every captured vessel, every piece of stolen technology, every defecting officer added to humanity's growing arsenal. And with the knowledge extracted from their prisoner, the warlord who now sat in silence, unwilling to accept what he had wrought, they targeted the Xelari's most vulnerable point. Their command network. The Xelari Empire did not function on chaos. It relied on rigid hierarchy, on absolute control from the top down. The fleet above Earth, though powerful, was still a small fraction of the Empire's full might. But if its command structure collapsed, if its leaders were removed, the entire invasion force would fall into disarray. Elias and his team devised a plan so audacious that even their own people hesitated. They would infiltrate the flagship of Supreme Commander Korthus, the Xelari leader overseeing the invasion. It was madness. The flagship was a floating fortress, a warship so heavily armored that even Earth's nuclear arsenal would struggle to dent it. Thousands of Xelari warriors patrolled its halls. No species had ever set foot aboard one and lived. And yet, humanity had long since stopped following the rules. Under the cover of a simulated distress signal, one broadcast by the defecting Vorthak's cruiser, Elias and a small strike team boarded the flagship. Not with brute force, not with overwhelming numbers. But with speed, precision, and the one thing the Xelari had never accounted for. Their own fear. As the infiltration team moved through the ship's corridors, chaos erupted. Xelari soldiers hesitated to fire. Some recoiled at the sight of the human warriors moving faster than their eyes could track. Others fled outright, their discipline shattered. They weren't fighting an army. They were fighting ghosts. And when Elias Voss finally reached the command deck, he found Supreme Commander Korthus standing before him. Not in defiance. Not in arrogance. But in disbelief. "This is impossible," the Xelari leader rasped. Elias tilted his head, his eyes glowing faintly with the energy of the stolen Xelari core. "You called us weak." And then the Supreme Commander realized the truth. This war was already over. The Supreme Commander hesitated for the first time in his long, brutal career. He had conquered worlds, crushed rebellions, annihilated entire species before they could threaten the Xelari Empire. He had believed humanity would be no different. And yet here they stood. Elias Voss and his strike team had reached the heart of the Xelari invasion fleet, not through brute force, but by turning the Xelari's greatest weapon, fear, against them. The flagship's security forces wavered, their once unshakable discipline breaking under the weight of uncertainty. The humans were not following the rules of war as the Xelari understood them. They had rewritten them. Elias took a slow step forward. The energy pulsing through his stolen exosuit crackled softly, distorting the air around him. The Supreme Commander could hear the distant alarms, the frantic voices of his officers. Reports of Xelari ships refusing orders. Crews abandoning their posts. Entire battalions surrendering to human forces without a fight. This is impossible. Corthus rasped again, his mandibles clicking in disbelief. This has never happened before. Elias studied him for a long moment, then shook his head. That's the problem, he said. You thought history would protect you. Corthus bared his fangs in frustration. The Xelari have ruled for thousands of years. We have crushed empires older than your entire species. You cannot hope to destroy us. Elias's expression didn't change. We don't have to destroy you, you're doing that yourself. And he was right. Even as they spoke, the Xelari fleet was unraveling. The virus the resistance had spread through their neural-linked communications continued to work its way through the ranks. Doubt turned to hesitation. Hesitation turned to disorder. And disorder turned to collapse. The Xelari were not a species that fought well in chaos. Their empire thrived on absolute control, on the certainty of their superiority. Now, that certainty had been shattered. Elias activated his calm. Humans of Earth, this is Voss. The enemy is broken. Now we finish this. Across the system, resistance fighters surged forward, seizing control of abandoned Xelari warships, launching devastating counterattacks against those who still tried to resist. The once invincible fleet was crumbling from within. Corthus saw it happening in real time. His empire, the might of the Xelari, was falling apart before his very eyes. And that was when he made his choice. The Supreme Commander reached for his command console, fingers trembling. He entered a code, one that no other Xelari had dared to use in centuries. A retreat order. Across the fleet, Xelari ships began to pull away, their captains realizing that to stay any longer was to face annihilation. The great war machine that had once darkened Earth's skies was retreating. They had lost. Elias watched Corthus, his expression unreadable. You thought we were weak. The Supreme Commander turned away, his voice hollow. Perhaps we were the weak ones all along. And then the Xelari were gone. The sky was clear for the first time in years. Where once the Xelari fleet had loomed over Earth, there was now only empty space. The last of their warships had vanished into the void, retreating to whatever corner of the galaxy still held their crumbling empire together. Humanity had won. But the victory did not feel like the celebrations of old wars. There were no parades, no grand speeches of triumph. The cost had been too high. Cities lay in ruins. Billions had perished. The scars of the invasion would remain for generations. And yet, humanity endured. Elias Voss stood atop the remains of a fallen Xelari war machine, staring out over the shattered skyline of what had once been Chicago. Survivors gathered in the streets below, engineers and soldiers working side by side to rebuild. The resistance was no longer a scattered rebellion. It was the foundation of something new. A voice crackled through his earpiece. The last Xelari forces have left the system. Looks like they're not coming back. Elias exhaled slowly. It was over. Or at least, this battle was. Vorthak, the defected Xelari commander, stood nearby, his expression unreadable. He had remained behind, not as a prisoner, but as something far more dangerous. A witness. He had seen the unthinkable, a species that had not only survived the Xelari but had turned their own tactics against them. What will you do now? Vorthak asked. Elias didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands, flexing his fingers. The energy that had once pulsed through his body was fading, but he could still feel it. Humanity had changed. The war had forced them to adapt beyond what nature had ever intended. They had broken their limits, surpassed expectations, rewritten the rules of survival. And that terrified him more than anything. Because the Xelari weren't the only threat in the galaxy. We rebuild, Elias finally said, but not just our cities, we rebuild ourselves. Vorthak studied him. You know this war isn't over, don't you? Elias nodded. The Xelari will come back eventually, or something worse will find us first. Then you must decide what kind of species you will become. Elias glanced at the horizon where the sun was beginning to rise. Humanity had been underestimated, dismissed as weak, seen as nothing more than prey. But now the galaxy knew the truth. They had not just survived. They had become something new. And when the next threat came, whatever it was, humanity would be ready.